The Valles Inheritance, a novel in 10 parts by Justin S. Page. Prologue, Part 2. Dr. Jordan, 1909 to 1912. Dr. Samuel Arthur Jordan arrived in Arizona 6 weeks later with a team of 4 and a Smithsonian letter of authority that opened doors and closed mouths with equal efficiency. He was 53 years old, a classicist and archaeologist of impeccable reputation and deeply unconventional instincts, a man who had built his career on the willingness to follow evidence wherever it led, while simultaneously maintaining a precise awareness of what the evidence, if made public prematurely, would lead to in terms of institutional response and public stability. He had a phrase he used with graduate students: "Truth is not the same as disclosure." They generally assumed he was being cynical. He was not. He descended into the cave system on a Tuesday morning in May of 1909 and did not emerge for 11 days. His field notes from those 11 days were never published. They were not, as later theorists would claim, destroyed by the Smithsonian. They were classified, held in a section of the institution's archive that did not appear in any public catalogue, and whose existence was acknowledged only in a single, heavily redacted memo from 1947 that a researcher named Patricia Chen would eventually discover while looking for something else entirely in 2016, 3 years before the memo's contents would send a different team into the canyon. What Jordan found, beyond what Kincaid had described, included 3 additional chamber complexes, connected by a tunnel system of approximately 18 miles of mapped passages and an unknown further extent. He found an astronomical observatory, a chamber with a precise aperture in its ceiling, oriented to an alignment he could not immediately identify, but which his astronomical training told him was neither the ecliptic nor any standard celestial reference point used by any civilization in his database. He found what he initially described in his notes as a library. Thousands of the sealed ceramic vessels arranged in a systematic order that took him 4 days to partially decode. The vessels containing rolled sheets of a material that was not papyrus, not vellum, not any organic substance he could name, inscribed with a language that shared structural features with every early writing system he knew and was identical to none of them. And he found the room he called, in his private notes, the telling room. The telling room was at the deepest point of the accessible system, a small chamber, perhaps 10 meters across, circular, with walls of a material distinct from the surrounding limestone. Smooth, dark, with a faint luminescence that Jordan initially attributed to bioluminescent organisms before ruling this out and arriving at an explanation he found so improbable that he wrote it down, crossed it out, rewrote it, and then sealed it in a separate envelope within his notes with the instruction: "Open only in the context of corroborating evidence, not before." The walls of the telling room were not inscribed. They were projected, covered in a constantly shifting display of imagery, rendered in a geometric language that bore a clear relationship to the inscriptions in the outer chambers, but which operated at a higher order of complexity, at a density of information that made the outer chambers look like a primer. Jordan sat in the telling room for 9 hours on his 9th day underground, working through his partial translation of the outer chamber language, building toward the telling room's imagery with the systematic patience of a man who understood that the worst thing you could do with a message you desperately wanted to understand was rush it. On the 10th hour, certain sections resolved. He emerged from the cave on the 11th day, climbed back to the rim, sat in the afternoon sun for 40 minutes, saying nothing, and then turned to his assistant, a 26-year-old named William Cross, who would go on to a distinguished career in classical archaeology while carrying a secret that cost him 3 marriages and 1 near breakdown, and said, "William, we are going to need considerably more time." They had 14 months. In 14 months, working in 3-week rotations to manage the physical and psychological toll, Jordan's team documented, translated partially, and began to understand what the cave system contained. Not entirely. Jordan was a rigorous man, and he resisted the compression of nuance into conclusion. But sufficiently. He understood that the builders were not from Earth. He understood that they had come from elsewhere. The telling room showed the journey with a clarity that required no translation, and that their arrival on Earth had been deliberate, purposeful, driven by necessity, and guided by a philosophy he could only partially articulate, but which seemed to center on the concept of continuity, of life persisting, of consciousness being too valuable to permit to expire. He understood that the knowledge in the ceramic vessels was technical, genuinely operationally technical, not mythological or ceremonial. It described processes, mechanisms, systems. Some of it was immediately incomprehensible, beyond the horizon of 1909 science by a margin Jordan could not measure. Some of it was tantalizingly close to comprehensible, like a mathematical proof that ends in a notation you almost but don't quite know. And he understood this was the part that went into the sealed envelope, the part that he spent 9 hours in the telling room confirming and reconfirming before he would allow himself to write it down. That the system the builders had created did not end with the cave. The cave was a library. The builders' legacy on Earth was not. It was an infrastructure. In his sealed envelope, in the careful script of a Victorian scholar who understood that the words he was writing had no precedent in any literature he knew, Jordan wrote, "They did not simply seed this world and leave. They remained. Not in body, the mummies are a monument, not a presence, but in mechanism. The systems described in the deeper chambers are not historical. They are operational. There is a network, global in extent, self-maintaining, automated, which continues to perform a function I can only describe as guardianship. The nature of the threat it guards against is specified in the telling room with painful clarity. I have seen what became of the world these people came from. I understand now why they built what they built here. God help us when we understand it fully." The sealed envelope went into the classified archive in 1912. In 1947, the archive received a new item, a technical analysis report from a team of engineers who had spent 8 months studying the ceramic vessel contents using the most advanced methods available to the post-war United States. The report was stamped with the highest classification designation in the US government system. Its conclusion rendered in the flat language of engineering analysis. 17 of the 43 studied documents describe systems and mechanisms of potential technical application. Of these, 3 describe navigation principles applicable to orbital mechanics, 2 describe propulsion concepts, and 1, document 31, contains what appears to be a comprehensive survey of this solar system, including surface feature mapping of all planetary bodies, with specific emphasis on Mars. Document 31 included coordinates. At 13.9 degrees south, 296.7 degrees east on Mars, document 31 showed a symbol that appeared throughout the Grand Canyon inscriptions as a marker, a symbol that Jordan had translated, with moderate confidence, as meaning, "The rest of what we left you."